Hello and welcome back to the Miguel Smith Writing Channel. I am your host, Miguel Smith. First of all, I want to thank y'all for watching my last video on Estrella Nocivo. That was a fun video to make, even though I despise editing so very much. Anyhow, seems like I'm going to make these videos in chronological order. That seems to be the most logical way of doing things. So that's what I'm going to do. That would, of course, bring us to Antonio Salazar, who I came up with in the mid-1980s. For those of you who have already read some of my material, you're already well aware of who this guy is. For those of you who are a little less aware, let's do sort of a broad general overview on him. So why don't we go ahead and jump forward from the 1980s and flash forward to today, as he is a billionaire chemist with some detective leanings. Not to mention a few head-scratching idiosyncrasies. But how does one get from point A to point beyond? Well, let's go on that journey. But before we do, I'd like to be upfront about this. If I could point to any one character out of my entire catalog of characters that I've ever created, this is perhaps the closest to a self-insert. I'm sure most writers at this point, or some point in their career, will have one of these characters, and this is mine. So where did Antonio Salazar start? Well, it came from a general awareness of the character of Zorro, and a stick. To any little kid, a stick represents anything from Excalibur to the power sword from Masters of the Universe. And in this respect, I was the same. So before I even saw the mark of Zorro in the mid-1980s, I was in my backyard with a stick making little Z's in the air or Z's on the fence and losing many a sword fight to other kids with their sticks, which were apparently better than mine. Or it's just my skill with the stick, whatever the case may be. As I mentioned in the previous video, a lot of my influences insofar as how my characters developed were in part, well, very much largely in part, to a lot of the pop culture that was shared to me by my parents and other older people. Another big influence on the creation of Antonio Salazar was, of course, The Shadow. One day my dad brought in some audio tapes that he had picked up from somewhere, and they were audio tapes of the Shadow radio adventures. So we would sit down and listen to those, and I'd be fascinated by these grim, dark stories about a shadowy figure that would arrive in the night and right all the wrongs. And that my dad is no longer with us, it is certainly an experience that I will treasure forever. If The Shadow wasn't enough, there were further detective influences. The first I'll mention, of course, is Dick Tracy. A lot of Antonio's aesthetic and certainly his usage of gadgets and so on and so forth, that really kind of started with Dick Tracy. This was the 80s, so this is way before we had things like Apple Watches. I mean, the thing that was the most awesome at the time were these little calculator watches that the teachers didn't like us having because, well, they didn't want us to be using them in math class. Other influences, of course, was Jeremy Brett's Sherlock Holmes, David Suchet's Hercule Poirot, I never can pronounce that right, Miss Marple, Jessica Fletcher, Columbo, the list goes on. Of course, Antonio Salazar follows a lot of the rich guy tropes, and, well, I look back at my comic book collection, and I see a lot of the influences that I drew from. We can, of course, point to Lex Luthor, Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark, Oliver Queen, the list goes on and on. So, yeah, that is essentially Antonio Salazar in a nutshell, briefly put. I want to thank you all for coming with me on this journey to explore Antonio Salazar, and I want to thank y'all again for stopping by and watching the Estrella Nocivo video, and look forward to the next character overview. I will be working on that shortly. Until then, you want to follow me on my Instagram, or perhaps even follow me on X. I don't know if that's what you want to do. Everybody's got their own boat to float and float the boat. Anyway, y'all take care and have a great weekend.